Hi home buddies, welcome back to my channel, Catskill Mountain Home Buddy. I have Nutty Chipper here. He's very excited because we came downstairs to film this video. So obviously from the title of my channel, I talk a lot about the Catskill area of New York. And I thought today I would do a compare and contrast video on two places that I have lived. Flagstaff, Arizona, and the Catskill Mountain area of New York State. So it's going to be Flagstaff, Arizona versus the Catskills area of New York. My husband and I have lived in both areas of the country. Now, I will say I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona a long time ago. So, if you live in Flagstaff now, it might be a little bit different than when we lived there, although probably not too much different. The mountains are the same. This is just my view of living in Flagstaff, Arizona versus the Catskill Mountains of New York State. They both have pros and cons. This is just, of course, my opinion. What do you think, Chipper? Are you happy you live in the Catskills? All right, for this video, I thought I'd come downstairs. It's a little bit quieter down here. I'm in our guest room, sitting in an armchair. So I thought that would be a good place to film this video. I can't go outside right now because it is February and it is 30 degrees outside. Let's begin. The competition has begun. Flagstaff, Arizona versus the Catskill Mountains. Category 1, cost of living. All right, so for each of these categories, I'm going to announce the winner according to the judge, which is me. Which area has better cost of living, for example? All right, so cost of living is the first category, and the winner goes to the Catskills. This is no contest. Flagstaff, Arizona is much more expensive in terms of property and owning a house, and even in renting. That's one part of cost of living that's more expensive than the Catskills. There's no competition. Back in the 90s, my first apartment was a 600 square foot apartment that I paid almost $700 a month for in Flagstaff, in northern Arizona. So, very expensive rents, crappy size apartments. Now, I never owned a house in Flagstaff because I was young and it was way before I was able to own a house. But in the 3 years I lived in Flagstaff, we paid very high rents for terrible apartments. Jump to the Catskill area of New York. When I moved to the Catskills, it was the early 2000s, and I was in a position to buy a home because I had my career up and going. And the owning property in the counties of the Catskills is much more affordable than owning property in Flagstaff, Arizona. So Flagstaff, Arizona, the properties are much more expensive. You get less acreage, and you're going to pay a lot more for let's say a 1,600 square foot house than you would pay in the Catskills. So your real estate money goes much longer in the Catskills than it ever goes in Flagstaff, Arizona. So that's just one aspect of the cost of living. The other aspect is everything else you buy. Flagstaff, Arizona is about a 2-hour drive from Phoenix, and it is a pretty isolated town. And I'll just give you a little story to illustrate that. When Joe and I first moved to Flagstaff, we're from the East Coast. In the East Coast, you drive from one town to the next. The towns are all together. So if you just want to take a drive and see what's in the next town, it's easy. So we looked at a map. This is how naive we were. We looked at a map and we saw Winslow, Arizona on the map, and it looked pretty close. We didn't really actually figure out the mileage. And we jumped in the car because we thought, oh, we need to buy some furniture. Well, let's go over to the next town and we'll see if we can find a furniture store in Winslow. So we're driving in the middle of the desert. There's literally nothing between Flagstaff and Winslow. And we realized very quickly, oh, Winslow's not close to Flagstaff. And there's literally nothing in between. At the time, there was nothing in between Flagstaff and Winslow. We're just driving through the open desert. It was beautiful. But and then we get to Winslow and there's nothing there. There's like no stores. It's like one street. So that was a big lesson for us East Coast people, is that, you can't just jump in your car and drive to the next town in Flagstaff, Arizona. So because it is way up the highway from Phoenix, and because it's kind of isolated, it costs money to truck things up to Flagstaff. So the cost of products in the stores is a little bit higher because you have to take into consideration how much it costs to truck the things in. So you might see higher prices in the grocery store, in other stores in Flagstaff, than you would see, let's say, in Phoenix, or an area that's not as far removed from the rest of the country. Catskill wins the competition in terms of cost of living. Catskills is much, much, much more affordable than Flagstaff was. So Catskill they win the first category. The Catskills wins the first category. All right, the second category, scenery. And the results are, it's a tie, because both Flagstaff, Arizona and the Catskills has gorgeous scenery. So let's take Flagstaff, Arizona first. So Flagstaff, Arizona is at the base of mountain ranges. And the biggest peak in Flagstaff, Arizona is called Humphreys Peak. And it's gorgeous. In the summer and in the spring, you look up at Humphreys Peak. Sometimes there's still snow on top of Humphreys Peak. And it's just gorgeous scenery. One of the things I loved about the West was how big the sky looks compared to the East Coast, because there are fewer things that obstruct the sky, like tall buildings. And between the expansive sky, the forests that are there, the mountains, it is very, very pretty. Flagstaff, Arizona is a very, very beautiful, beautiful, beautiful town. So lovely scenery in Flagstaff. But the Catskills also has beautiful, beautiful scenery. And I mean, there are, especially in the autumn, the Catskill Mountains with all of the forests and the hills and the mountains. It is beautiful also. It's beautiful in a little bit different way because it's not the high desert, but it is also very, very beautiful. And so I give that a tie. For scenery, both Flagstaff in Arizona and the New York Catskills are equal in beauty. So I wouldn't say one's prettier than the other. They're both gorgeous. Oh, Chipper's going to bark at nothing. All right, category 3, natural disasters. I'm giving this one to the Catskills. The Catskills has many fewer natural disasters than Arizona, especially northern Arizona. So when I lived in Flagstaff, we were plagued by wildfires. And even though the wildfires didn't affect the area I was living in directly, the smoke from the wildfires hung in the air for days and days and days. And I have asthma. So the wildfire smoke can really, really wreak havoc on your breathing. And it's just not nice. It hangs in the air. It obstructs the view. It obstructs the sky. It smells. And honestly, I lived in many areas of the West, and except for Phoenix, every place I lived in the West had wildfire smoke. Even the California desert had wildfire smoke hanging over the cities I lived in at particular times of the year when wildfires were happening. How many times have I smelled wildfire smoke in the Catskills? 0 times. There's no smoke here from wildfires. We don't really have wildfires. If we do, they're very, very minor. I have never once in my life, and I've lived here 17 years, and I have never had wildfire smoke in the Catskills. So just wildfires alone, the Catskills wins, because we really don't have smoke and wildfires. We don't have earthquakes in the Catskills either. The West Coast does have earthquakes. Now, I personally did not experience an earthquake when I lived in Flagstaff, but I did experience earthquakes in other areas of the Southwest. So I'm happy that we don't have earthquakes here in the Catskills. Other natural disasters, drought. We don't have any droughts in the Catskills. As a matter of fact, it rains here all the time, and we have plenty of water, whereas the West is always going to be plagued with droughts, and the Colorado River is drying up. So I would definitely say, in terms of natural disasters, the Catskills wins. So I'm going to give that one to the Catskills. All right. The next category is your ability to escape winter weather. And the winner is Flagstaff, Arizona. That was one of the things I loved about Flagstaff. Yes, it snows in Flagstaff, Arizona. Not all of Arizona is the low desert. And it snows a lot in Flagstaff, Arizona. But the great thing about Flagstaff is that if you're sick of the winter weather, all you have to do is drive in your car to lower elevations. And before you know it, you're in the desert and it's nice and warm. And the place that my husband and I like to go to a lot, which wasn't that far of a drive, was Sedona, Arizona. So there's a drive, a beautiful drive from Flagstaff to Sedona called Oak Creek Canyon. And it's this windy road through the woods into this canyon, right into Sedona. And Sedona, even though it's only about a 25-mile drive, has much warmer temperatures than Flagstaff because of the lower elevation. So if you're sick of the winter snow and you want to escape and be warm and walk around without a coat on, 25-mile drive down a beautiful Oak Creek Canyon right into Sedona and have an afternoon in Sedona. I mean, that was the greatest thing about Flagstaff, is that you could get in the car and you don't have to go to Sedona. You could go on the highway and drive 2 hours down to Phoenix and be in even warmer weather, because Phoenix was even lower elevation than Sedona. I love that about Flagstaff, was that if I ever got sick of winter weather, we just hopped in the car and we took a day trip down to Phoenix or down to Sedona. All right, so I live in the Catskills now. We're in February. There's snow outside. It's cold. Now, what if I wanted to jump in the car and drive to the warmth? Where am I going to go? I'd have to drive for a whole day to get anywhere warmer than the Catskills. I can't just drive 25 miles away and escape the winter here. I'm trapped here in the winter. So that's not the greatest thing about the Catskills, is that you have to fly away or take a 2-day trip down to South Carolina or Florida to be in real warm weather. Flagstaff, you just drive 2 hours and you're in Phoenix. It's night and day. So that was a nice benefit of living in Flagstaff, was when you got sick of the winter weather, you could escape, and you really can't escape the winter weather in the Catskills. So I'm going to give that one to the Flagstaff for sure. All right, that brings me to the next category, climate. Which climate is better, the Catskills of New York or Flagstaff, Arizona? You're going to be surprised. I'm giving this one to the Catskills. And I've lived in both. All right, why am I not giving this one to Flagstaff? You might think, oh, the Western, it's sunnier more in the West, doesn't rain as much. I'm giving this one to the Catskills because Flagstaff is cold for many, many months of the year because of their altitude. And honestly, I didn't like the summers in Flagstaff, Arizona. The summers in Flagstaff, Arizona, to me, were freezing. It was never that hot, and there was always this cold wind. So I used to like to sit in the sun when I was in my 20s. Don't do that anymore. I couldn't sit in the sun outside with a bathing suit on in Flagstaff, Arizona, because there was this biting wind all the time, and I would be freezing. Even though it was sunny and the temperature was warm, there was that I don't know if it was a mountain wind or what, but it was cold. It was cold. To me, it wasn't really summer weather. That was a disappointment, because you have a lot of snow in Flagstaff in the winter, and so by the time the summer comes, you want warm weather, and it's just not there. And the other thing that happened when I lived in Flagstaff, I used to work in Walmart in Flagstaff. I worked in the garden center. So I was outside loading bags of manure into people's trunks in Flagstaff. And I worked there in the summer. I only worked there one summer. I couldn't take it after that. But one July, I'm working at Walmart. I'm out in the back putting things in people's trunks. And it started snowing in July. It was snowing in July. That's how cold the summers are in Flagstaff. And I wanted to cry because the winters had been so long and I just wanted a warm day to work outside in Flagstaff. And when it started snowing, I was devastated. Now, how many times has it snowed in July since I've lived in New York? Never. We have warm, actually warm summers here in the Catskills. It doesn't snow. And there's no biting ice cold wind that comes in the summer that prevents me from sitting outside. Now, of course, I don't wear a bathing suit in the backyard anymore, but I would say that I like the weather in the Catskills better than I like the climate and the weather in Flagstaff, Arizona. And that was just my experience. So when we left Flagstaff, I wasn't sad. I was thrilled because I didn't like the climate at all in Flagstaff. I wasn't impressed with the climate in Flagstaff. I don't know. I guess it's the altitude as to why it's always cold. So I wasn't happy about it. Now, the good thing about Flagstaff is that because it's so cold, they don't have air conditioning. So if you rent in a house or an apartment, most of them do not have air conditioning because you really don't need it. Because even in the summers, it's really not hot. It's cold. So you don't really need air conditioning. Now, the same thing can be said for the Catskills. A lot of homes and businesses in the Catskills don't have air conditioning either, but we don't get snow in the summer in the Catskills, and it is much warmer here in the Catskills. It does cool off at night, but the days are nice. They're nice and warm. So that's where I'm going to go. Catskills is winning that. All right, next category is shopping. And the winner is Flagstaff, Arizona. Flagstaff, Arizona, you wouldn't think this. And again, I lived there in the 90s, so it's much more built up today than it was even when I lived there. But there's a lot of places to shop. Anything you need, you can find in Flagstaff, Arizona. You don't need to leave Flagstaff to go to Phoenix to find goods. They have a mall. They have all the big box stores. They have also adorable shopping in town of little mom and pop shops. I remember there was a kitchen store that we love to go to, and I have a lot of things in my house from that kitchen store in Flagstaff, Arizona, that I loved going to that store. It was great. They had little craft stores. They had stores that sold Native American crafts. So much shopping in Flagstaff, Arizona, that there was no reason to ever leave Flagstaff to go shopping. I live in the Catskills now. The Catskills is, it's a rural area of New York State. And if I want to go to a mall or to big box stores, it's a little bit of a drive. It's much more of a drive for me in the Catskills to go shopping than it is to go shopping in Flagstaff. So that was very convenient in Flagstaff, was that there were many, many, many great shopping options right there. You didn't have to drive down to Phoenix to go shopping. So that was nice. So I'm going to give Flagstaff the award for shopping. Better than the Catskills. All right, the last category I have is which city or area is it better to cook in? Cooking category. And the winner is the Catskills. Flagstaff is a very high altitude town. It's at almost 7,000 feet above sea level, which means when you cook, you have to use high altitude recipes. So when I lived in Flagstaff for several years, whenever I cooked, I had to adjust for high altitude. And I like to bake. And so that's the number one thing that when you're baking, you have to adjust for high altitude. It's a pain in the neck. I didn't like having to adjust for high altitude. And I do think it affected the quality of what I created in terms of baking and cooking. Obviously, the Catskills are not a high elevation. Yeah, we're higher than New York City, but I don't need to cook high elevation recipes. So I enjoy cooking and baking much more in the Catskills than I did cooking high altitude recipes in Flagstaff, Arizona. So I'm going to give that win to the Catskills. So both areas of the country that I have lived in, Flagstaff and the Catskills, are beautiful. They have their pros and they have their cons. There's no perfect place to live, but I thought I would do this video because I've lived in both areas of the country, and I thought it would be fun to do a little compare and contrast of Flagstaff, Arizona and the Catskill area of New York. So if I were to pick where I prefer to live, I'm going to pick the Catskills every time. I would personally pick the Catskills, but again, I enjoyed living in Flagstaff. There are things I liked about Flagstaff that were better than the Catskills. So I would pick the Catskills over Flagstaff. But if you have never, let's say you don't live in the United States, or you are looking for a place to go for a vacation, Flagstaff, Arizona is an amazing place to go for a vacation. You have the Grand Canyon, not a far drive away from Flagstaff, Arizona. There is an observatory in Flagstaff where the planet, which is not a planet anymore, of Pluto was discovered. You can take a tour of the observatory in Flagstaff. There are many museums in Flagstaff that you can visit. There's a ghost tour in Flagstaff you can do. Route 66 goes through Flagstaff. That has its own history. Flagstaff, Arizona is a great place to go to really see the Southwest, to see the American Southwest. And I would definitely recommend, if you've never been to Flagstaff, to visit, because it really is a lovely place to visit and see a lot of cool areas. Sedona, Arizona, which is by Flagstaff, also a gorgeous little city with a lot to do there. So if you're in Flagstaff, take a trip down Oak Creek Canyon into Sedona. The Catskills is also a great area to visit if you've never been to the New York Catskills. Remember, I told you in earlier videos, the New York Catskills is made up of 4 counties, and there are so many things to see in all 4 of those counties. You know, we have a lot. The Catskills is just a bigger area of New York than the little area of Flagstaff, Arizona. So there's so many things to do and see in the Catskills. But again, I would highly recommend visit both, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, if you're ever looking for a place to come for a vacation. So thank you for joining me for this video. Consider subscribing if you like videos on the Catskill area, on cooking, baking, and farmhouse style, because it's a lot of what I do on this channel. So consider subscribing if you haven't already. Hey, if you're from Flagstaff or you've been to both Flagstaff and the Catskills, put in your opinion in the comments section of the video. So Chipper and I thank you for joining us. Say hi, Chipper. Say hi. Chipper, you say hi? You say hi? Say hi. Chipper says he loves living in the Catskills also. He told me last night. He said, I love living in the Catskills. Although he's never been to Flagstaff, so he doesn't know. He doesn't know the difference. All right, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys in the next video.